My name is Elias Vance. It is a name that has been signed on countless incident reports, etched onto brass, plaques at ranger stations from the misty peaks of the Appalachians to the sun, scorched canyons of the Southwest, and spoken with quiet respect, I hope, by those I've had the privilege to serve alongside. For a decade, I have worn the uniform of the National Park Service, a calling that has demanded proficiency in wilderness survival, the grim arts of search and rescue, and the meticulous stewardship of our nation's natural resources. It is a life of quiet dedication, a commitment to the preservation of those few wild spaces left untamed by the relentless march of concrete and commerce. This dedication, this yearning for the profound silence and untamed heart of the wilderness, has now led me to the ultimate crucible, Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska. I sought this assignment, sought the isolation and the challenge. There's a certain allure to Alaska, what many call the last frontier. Perhaps it's a desire to test the very limits of one's capabilities, or maybe it's a quieter, more personal quest for something lost or yet undiscovered within oneself. I had envisioned Denali as a place of stark, almost spiritual light and beauty, a landscape that could cleanse and clarify. I was selected for a specialized posting, a remote monitoring station deep within the park's interior, ostensibly for unique ecological data collection. I knew it would be solitary. I did not yet know it came with its own peculiar set of operational guidelines rules that were not in any standard NPS manual. The final leg of my journey to Station 7, nestled in a rarely traversed valley on the north side of the Alaska Range, was by a sputtering bush plane that seemed to defy gravity more through stubbornness than aerodynamics. As we cleared the last craggy peaks, the panorama that unfolded was breathtaking, almost brutal in its scale. The Alaska Range itself was a massive wall of rock, glacial ice, and snow, a formidable spine bisecting the world. Below, the emerald halo of the boreal forest stretched as far as the eye could see, a deep ancient green. The pilot, a man whose face was a roadmap of Alaskan winters, pointed towards a barely discernible scar in the wilderness, the station. "That's her," he grunted over the engine's roar. "Good luck, Ranger. You'll need it." Stepping out of the plane, the air was the first thing that struck me. So cold it felt like a physical presence, yet so pure it was intoxicating. It carried the unique smell of snow, a crisp, clean scent with undercurrents of damp earth and distant pine. The landscape was a masterpiece of raw, elemental power, the vast scenery that makes you feel tiny by comparison. I could see for miles across unmarred expanses of tundra and forest, a vista that initially sang of freedom. But as the drone of the departing plane faded, a silence descended, so profound it was almost a sound in itself, surreal experience of total silence I'd read about. It was then that the awe began to curdle into something else, a nascent unease. The sheer, overwhelming scale of Denali, its ancient indifference, felt less like majestic beauty and more like a slumbering beast, its gaze fixed upon me, the insignificant intruder. This place, I was beginning to understand, was a land of paradox, inviting and terrifying, accessible and remote, welcoming and isolating. The beauty was a mask, a lure. The station itself was a small, sturdy cabin, built to withstand the worst Denali could throw at it. Inside, it was Spartan but functional. There was no welcoming committee, no grizzled veteran to pass the torch. Celis, my supposed superior according to the transfer papers, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, on the rough, hewn wooden desk, lay a single, bound ledger. Its cover was plain, dark leather, worn smooth with age and handling. The title, embossed in faded gold lettering, read, Denali Station 7. Peculiar Regulations and Observations. My training had prepared me for a lot, but not for this. The paper within was thick, yellowed, and filled with typewritten entries, some supplemented by spidery, handwritten notes. These were not the standard park regulations I knew by heart. These were different. Denali Station 7, Peculiar Regulations 1. All reflective surfaces within the station cabin, windows, mirrors, polished metal must be covered from dusk until full daylight. Verify coverage before nightfall. No exceptions, too. The northern lights, aurora borealis, are not to be observed directly for more than 5 consecutive minutes. If whistling sounds, akin to high frequency radio interference or faint human whistling, accompany the aurora, seek immediate shelter indoors. Do not look out until the sounds have ceased for at least 1 hour. Log any such occurrence. 3. Any wildlife exhibiting behavior contrary to established Denali patterns, e.g., unnatural silence from avian populations, herds moving in perfect, uncharacteristic synchronicity, predators and prey congregating peacefully, must be reported immediately via encrypted channel. Under no circumstances are such fauna to be engaged with or approached. Log entry format, code Umbra. 4. The ancient game trails leading towards the geological formation known locally as the Bone Pass. The coordinates appended are strictly off limits for all foot and vehicle patrols. GPS tracking units have historically shown anomalous readings and signal loss in this sector. These trails do not officially register on park maps. 5. Should you encounter man-made structures, cairns, or artifacts not documented on official park historical surveys or maps, particularly those appearing to be of pre-park indigenous origin, do not touch or disturb them. Leave a small, respectful offering of dried berries, tobacco, or a similar natural token as per traditional Athabascan custom, and retreat from the area by the most direct route. Document and report from a safe distance. 6. Under no circumstances are the names Gieg or Nahani to be spoken aloud. This prohibition is especially critical after dark, within earshot of running water, or during periods of unusual seismic activity. I read them again, a knot tightening in my stomach. The language was formal, almost bureaucratic. Yet the implications sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. There were no explanations, no justifications, just stark, unequivocal commands. A final, typewritten note at the bottom of the last page read, "These are not suggestions, Ranger. Adherence is not discretionary. Your survival, and potentially the integrity of this sector, depends upon it. S. Blackwood, Sector Supervisor, retired." Celis Blackwood. So he existed, or had. The word retired felt ominous. These rules felt less like safety protocols and more like wards. A fragile set of instructions to navigate a minefield whose true dangers remained unnamed. It was as if someone, long ago, had encountered something here, something terrifying, and these rules were the desperate, codified remnants of that encounter. A corrupted, incomplete map of how to survive in the shadow of an unknown power. My first few days were a blur of settling in, establishing patrol routes, and trying to reconcile the breathtaking beauty of Denali with the unsettling weight of that ledger. The vastness, which I had craved, began to feel oppressive. The silence, initially a balm, now seemed to press in, amplifying every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind through the dense spruce that crowded the lower slopes. Sometimes, I'd catch a fleeting shadow at the periphery of my vision as I navigated the subalpine scrub, only to turn and find nothing but the wind-stunted willows. Was it an animal? Or was the isolation already beginning to fray the edges of my perception? My training warned against letting the wilderness play tricks on the mind, but Denali felt different, imbued with an ancient, watchful presence. One evening, as the extraordinary Alaskan twilight began to paint the sky in hues of violet and rose, I was returning to the cabin. The light was transforming the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. I glanced at the cabin window and saw my own distorted reflection staring back. Rule 1. A jolt, cold and sharp, went through me. I fumbled with the heavy blackout curtain, my heart thudding with an irrational urgency. It was just a reflection, I told myself. Just a rule. Later that night, unable to sleep, I stepped outside. The air was biting, the silence absolute. Then, carried on a breeze that seemed to spring from nowhere, I heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound, almost like distant whistling, or the whine of an old radio searching for a signal. My gaze was drawn upwards, towards the star-dusted sky, half expecting to see the shimmering dance of the aurora. Rule 2. The memory of it hit me with the force of a physical blow. I scrambled back inside, the wooden door thudding shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the vast emptiness. I didn't look out again that night. The whistling whisper on the wind a chilling lullaby. The rules were beginning to feel less ink on paper and more like living things, their unseen teeth grazing my sanity, and the ledger of peculiar regulations and observations had become my unwelcome shadow, its typewritten pronouncements echoing in the vast silences of Station 7. The initial unease had solidified into a persistent, low hum of anxiety, a counterpoint to the raw, indifferent beauty of Denali. Each sunrise, painting the colossal peaks with alpenglow, that ethereal, fiery kiss of light on snow, felt less like a new beginning and more like a temporary reprieve. The nights, even with the blackout curtains religiously drawn, as per Rule 1, were the worst. The wind, a constant presence in the Alaska range, seemed to carry whispers that were not entirely of the elements, sometimes a high, thin, keen that reminded me of the warning in Rule 2 regarding the aurora, even when the skies were clear of its spectral dance. Sleep became a shallow, restless affair, punctuated by dreams that felt too vivid, too steeped in the oppressive atmosphere of the station. I'd dream of endless, snow-filled corridors, of eyes watching from the tree line, of the ledger itself, its pages turning in a non-existent breeze, revealing new, more disturbing rules. The isolation, a companion I had once sought, now felt like a tightening vise, pressing in on my sanity. Was this the psychological hibernation some studies of polar isolation described, an emotional flattening as a coping mechanism? Or was it something else, a slow erosion caused by this place and its secrets? I threw myself into the routine of patrols, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. My designated routes took me through a variety of Denali's ecosystems, the lower taiga forests, where spruce and birch grew dense, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. The subalpine scrub, a tangle of willows and dwarf birch, and onto the exposed alpine tundra, where the ground was a carpet of hardy mosses and lichens, and the wind bit with an untamed ferocity. The ground underfoot often had a strange, springy quality, the permafrost lying just beneath the thin active layer. Sometimes, my boot would punch through into muck, overlying something hard and icy. It was during one such patrol, near the edge of a dense spruce forest that bordered a vast, open tundra, that Rule 3 slammed into my consciousness with chilling force. I'd been observing a small herd of caribou, their movements usually fluid and natural. Today they were wrong. They moved with a jerky, unnatural synchronicity, their heads all turning at the exact same instant, their usually placid eyes wide and staring, not at me, but at some fixed point beyond me in the dense woods. Then, a profound silence fell. The usual chatter of ptarmigan, the scolding of squirrels, even the incessant buzz of insects all ceased. It was as if the entire forest held its breath. My skin prickled. This was the unnatural silence from avian populations the ledger warned about. The caribou remained frozen for a long minute. Then, as one, they bolted. Not in a panicked scatter, but in a tight, perfectly formed phalanx, disappearing over a ridge with an eerie, coordinated speed. My hand trembled as I keyed the encrypted channel on my radio. Station 7 to Denali Control. Code Umbra. Repeat, Code Umbra. Sector 4, grid reference. I described the caribou behavior, the unnatural silence. The voice that crackled back was clipped. Professional, but I could detect an underlying tension. Acknowledged, Station 7. Log details. Do not investigate further. Maintain your current patrol parameters, but exercise extreme caution. Log details. I pulled out my field notebook. My fingers clumsy with cold, and a sudden visceral fear. The entry in the official station log later that day was terse, factual. But in the peculiar regulations ledger under Rule 3, I found a handwritten annotation by S. Blackwood. They see it. They know. Don't let it see you knowing. A fresh wave of cold washed over me. The incident amplified my vigilance. Every shadow seemed deeper, every rustle of leaves more sinister. The sheer scale of the landscape, which once inspired awe, now felt like a hunting ground, and I the prey. I found myself constantly scanning the tree lines, the distant ridges, my senses stretched taut. Big nature I'd read about in a ranger's blog felt less like an embrace and more like the gaping maw of something ancient and predatory. A few days later, my patrol route took me near the coordinates appended to Rule 4A, the Bone Pass. The rule was explicit, strictly off limits. The official park maps showed nothing remarkable in this sector, just another fold in the rugged terrain. But the ledger mentioned anomalous GPS readings and signal loss. Curiosity, that dangerous human trait, gnawed at me. I didn't enter the pass itself, but I climbed a nearby ridge that offered a vantage point. The air here felt different, heavier, charged. My GPS unit, which had been functioning perfectly, flickered and died. The radio emitted a burst of static, then silence. From the ridge, I could see the entrance to the Bone Pass. It wasn't a pass in the conventional sense, more like a jagged wound in the mountainside, a narrow, shadowed defile choked with scree and ancient, twisted pines. The rocks on either side were a stark, bleached white, like weathered bones, which I supposed gave the pass its name. There was a palpable sense of desolation, of a place shunned by light and life. Even from a distance, I felt a primal urge to retreat. I remembered Blackwood's note on another rule. Some places remember, some places wait. I didn't linger. I replaced the GPS batteries later. They were fine. The unit powered up as if nothing had happened. The most unsettling encounter, however, came a week later, deep in a rarely visited section of the northern foothills. I stumbled upon it unexpectedly. A small, circular clearing, and in its center, a cairn of stones. It wasn't a trail marker. It was too deliberate, too ritualistic. The stones were dark, river smoothed, and arranged with an undeniable intentionality. It wasn't on any park survey. This was precisely what Rule 5 described aid man-made structures, not documented, particularly those appearing to be of pre-park indigenous origin. My heart hammered. The rule was clear: do not touch or disturb them. Leave a small, respectful offering and retreat. I had a small pouch of dried berries in my pack, part of my emergency rations. With trembling hands, I placed a few at the base of the cairn, as per the Athabascan custom mentioned in the rule. As I did, I felt a distinct drop in temperature, a prickling on my skin, as if unseen eyes were watching. The silence here was different from the code umbra silence. This was older, heavier, imbued with a sense of ancient reverence and a potent, slumbering power. I backed away slowly, then turned and retreated by the most direct route. The image of the cairn burned into my mind. I logged the incident, the coordinates, the offering. Blackwood's note for Rule 5 was chillingly simple. They are still tended. They are still sacred. Do not presume. The names, Rule 6. Under no circumstances are the names Gieg or Nahani to be spoken aloud. I'd researched them discreetly in some of the anthropological texts I had. Gieg, Nahani, spirits, or perhaps something more from Athabascan lore. The Nahani were sometimes referred to as woodsmen, spirits of those lost in the forest. Gieg was an infamous bad spirit, one whose very thought could cause sickness. The prohibition against speaking their names, especially after dark or near running water, felt like a desperate ward against summoning something terrible. The Koyukon people, whose ancestral lands these were, held deep beliefs about the spirits of the land, of animals, of the mountains themselves. Denali, the Great One, was not just a mountain, it was a presence, a power. One evening, while reviewing the station's geological surveys, trying to distract myself, a tremor ran through the cabin. It was slight, but unmistakable. Denali is a seismically active area. The lamp on the desk rattled, and in that instant, unbidden, one of the forbidden names flashed through my mind. I didn't speak it, but the mere thought, coupled with the tremor and the encroaching darkness, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I found myself glancing at the door, half expecting to see it bulge inward. The ledger was becoming more than a set of rules. It was a chronicle of fear, a testament to something ancient and malevolent that resided in the heart of Denali. And I, Elias Vance, was now its keeper, bound by its warnings, haunted by its implications, alone in the vast, watchful wilderness. The weight of that knowledge, of those unseen eyes, was a burden heavier than any mountain, and the solitude of Station 7 was no longer a quiet companion, but a whispering tormentor. Weeks blot into a monotonous cycle of patrols, log entries, and the increasingly oppressive weight of the peculiar regulations. The vast, indifferent wilderness of Denali, once a landscape I sought for its stark beauty, now felt like a meticulously crafted prison, its boundaries defined not by fences, but by fear and the cryptic warnings in Silas Blackwood's ledger. My sleep was a tapestry of fractured images, the unnatural stillness of the Code Umbra, Caribou the distant, Bone, White Maw of the Forbidden Pass, and the knowing, ancient eyes I sometimes felt watching from the dense spruce forests that clawed up the mountainsides. The psychological toll of extreme isolation, the kind I'd read about in studies of polar expeditions, was beginning to manifest in ways my training hadn't fully prepared me for. Was it paranoia? Or was Denali itself an active participant in this slow unraveling? The rules, once just ink on yellowed paper, now felt like sentient entities, their presence palpable in the small cabin. Rule 1, the covering of reflective surfaces, became an obsessive ritual. One evening, distracted by a flickering in the radio receiver, I was late drawing the thick blackout curtain over the main window. For a fleeting second, as the last vestiges of the Alaskan twilight painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I caught my reflection. But behind my shoulder, deeper in the glass, something else seemed to shift, a flicker of movement. Too tall, too gaunt to be an animal, too quick to be a trick of the fading light. I slammed the curtain across, my breath catching in my throat. The image seared into my mind. I spent the rest of that night with my back to the wall. Every creak of the cabin, every sigh of the wind amplified 100-fold. Blackwood's scrawled addendum to Rule 1 read, "They see out. Don't let them see in. What looks back is not always you." The aurora borealis, when it appeared, was no longer a celestial wonder, but a harbinger of dread. One particularly active night, The sky writhed with curtains of green and violet light. Then came the whistling, as Rule 2 warned, faint at first, like high-frequency interference, then growing more distinct, almost melodic, but utterly devoid of human warmth. It seemed to emanate not from the sky, but from the air itself, from the very fabric of the silence around the station. I retreated indoors, heart pounding, the sound seeming to probe at the cabin walls. I pressed my ear to the door, a foolish act, and heard, or thought I heard, something brush against the exterior wood, a sound like dry leaves skittering, though there were no deciduous trees close enough to account for it. The log entry for Rule 2 from Blackwood was stark. The lights danced to their tune. The whistling is their call. Don't answer. My patrols became exercises in heightened, almost painful awareness. The vast, unmarred expanses of tundra, covered in a carpet of hardy mosses, and lichens that felt springy and strange underfoot, due to the permafrost just inches below, felt less like open space and more like an exposed stage. The silence of the wilderness, sometimes so profound it was a physical presence, would occasionally be broken by the distant thunder of glacier calving or the eerie creak and groan of trees in the wind, sounds that seemed to carry their own unsettling narratives in this isolated place. I found myself meticulously documenting every anomaly, my field notes becoming a mirror of the peculiar regulations. Ledger. Another, Code Umbra, event occurred near a glacial river, its waters milky with rock flour. A lone wolf, usually a creature of wary intelligence, stood stock still on the opposite bank, its gaze fixed on a point high on the mountainside, its body rigid, emitting a low, continuous growl that was more fear than aggression. Then, like the caribou, it vanished, not with the fluid grace of its kind, but with a sudden, jerky movement, as if snatched away. The ledger became my obsession. I pored over Blackwood's entries, his handwriting growing more erratic, more desperate in the later pages. He wrote of previous rangers at Station 7, some of whom had simply walked away, their gear left behind, their entries in the official log ceasing abruptly. One entry, heavily underlined, spoke of the sounds. The land here has a voice, not just wind or water. It remembers, it calls. Some hear it more clearly than others. This resonated deeply with the Athabascan beliefs I'd researched. The idea that the land, the mountains, even the trees and streams possessed spirits. Denali, the Great One, was not just a geographical feature, it was a powerful entity. A sacred place with its own stories and its own guardians. Rule 6. The prohibition against speaking the names Gieg or Nahani weighed heavily on my mind. Gieg, the bad spirit, whose very thought could cause sickness. Nahani, the woodsman. Spirits of those lost. The Athabascan people understood the power of names, of words spoken in places of power. One night, a particularly violent tremor shook the cabin. The Denali fault system was a restless giant beneath us. In the disoriented moments that followed, the name Gieg surfaced in my thoughts, unbidden and sharp. A wave of nausea and inexplicable dread washed over me. The oil lamp flickered violently, casting dancing, monstrous shadows, and for a terrifying instant, I thought I saw a face in the wavering flame, eyes burning with cold malice. The Bone Pass. Rule 4. Its coordinates were burned into my memory. Blackwood's notes on this were more fragmented, almost unhinged. Not a pass. A door. Older than the mountains. They don't use maps. He'd included a crude sketch, not of a trail, but of what looked like a symbol, a spiral turning inward. I found myself drawn to the official park maps, comparing them to the off-limits coordinates, searching for any hint, any geological anomaly that might explain the dread associated with the place. The area was depicted as unremarkable, just another fold in the colossal Alaska Range. Yet the pull of it, the need to understand, grew stronger with each passing day, a dangerous counterpoint to the explicit warning. My radio, my only link to the outside world, became both a comfort and a source of anxiety. Sometimes, the encrypted channel would crackle with static, and I'd hear faint, distorted voices, too garbled to understand, not listed on any official NPS frequency. Were they other isolated personnel, atmospheric tricks, or something else? The Park Service archives mentioned strange disappearances and unexplained events in Denali's history. Stories that once seemed like remote curiosities, but now felt chillingly relevant. One late afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the tundra, I found a loose floorboard beneath Blackwood's old bunk. Prying it up, I discovered a small, oilskin wrapped package. Inside was a tarnished silver locket and a single, folded piece of paper. The paper contained a list of dates, and beside each, a single, spidery word: awake, watching, hungry, calling. The last date was only a few years prior, followed by a hastily scrawled, almost illegible sentence: "It knows my name now. The pass is open." A cold dread, sharper and more profound than anything I had yet experienced, pierced through me. The rules were not just precautions. They were a failing defense. Blackwood hadn't just retired. He had become another story in the ledger, another whisper in the wind. And the cycle, whatever it was, seemed to be turning again. The wind picked up outside, howling around the eaves of the cabin, like a mournful chorus, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my time of passive observation was coming to an end. Denali was no longer just watching, it was waiting. The discovery of Silas Blackwood's hidden cache, the tarnished locket, and the chilling, one-word entries culminating in, "It knows my name now. The pass is open," had irrevocably shifted my reality at Station 7. The peculiar regulations were no longer just a set of bizarre operational guidelines. They were a desperate, failing bulwark against something ancient and aware. Blackwood hadn't retired, he'd been consumed. Another victim of Denali's deep, dark heart. The isolation, once a chosen companion, now felt like a hunter's snare, tightening with each passing hour. The wind, a constant voice in the Alaska Range, no longer carried mere whispers. It howled with a predatory hunger, echoing Blackwood's final, terrifying pronouncements. The days that followed were lived on a knife's edge. Sleep was a luxury I could scarcely afford, and when it came, it was plagued by visions of the Bone Pass, its bleached, skeletal rocks beckoning, and of blackwood's scrawled spiral, turning endlessly inward. The psychological hibernation I'd read about in polar isolation studies was a distant memory. My senses were raw, exposed. Every nerve ending screaming. I found myself obsessively checking the blackout curtains. Roll 20. The slightest sliver of Alaskan twilight sending jolts of adrenaline through me. The memory of that fleeting, gaunt shadow behind my reflection was a constant, unwelcome guest. The radio became my only tenuous link to sanity, though even that was fraying. The encrypted channel usually reserved for terse, code Umbra, reports crackled with increasing frequency, not with official traffic, but with bursts of static, and what sounded like distorted chanting, almost human but fundamentally other. Were these the voices Blackwood had alluded to in his ledger? The land here has a voice. It calls. The park archives mentioned unexplained disappearances, climbers and even rangers vanishing without a trace in Denali's vastness. These were no longer abstract historical accounts. They felt like imminent possibilities. One morning, the air was unnaturally still. The usual sounds of the boreal forest, the chatter of unseen creatures, the rustle of spruce and birch, were absent. It was a silence more profound, more absolute than any code Umbra event I had experienced. It felt like the entire park, from the permafrost-laden tundra with its springy carpet of mosses and lichens to the colossal ice-sheathed peaks of the Alaska Range, was holding its breath. Then, a low, guttural sound rolled through the valley, a sound that vibrated in my bones, not the thunder of glacier calving, but something more akin to a colossal sigh or a growl. My gaze was drawn inexorably toward the coordinates of the Bone Pass. Rule 40 strictly off limits. But Blackwood's wormids. The pass is open, echoed in my mind with the force of a summons. The ledger, my constant, dreadful companion, lay open on the desk. Blackwood's final, almost illegible entry under Rule 4 read, "The trails don't lead out. They lead in. The old maps lie. The new maps are blind." I knew then that my time at Station 7 was no longer about observation or adherence to rules. It was about confrontation, or perhaps surrender. The pull towards the pass was no longer mere curiosity. It was a compulsion, a dark magnetism. I checked my gear: ice axe, crampons, emergency rations, the encrypted radio I no longer trusted, and, on a grim impulse, Blackwood's tarnished silver locket. I left the peculiar regulations ledger on the desk. Its warnings had failed its previous keeper. They would likely fail me. The journey to the Bone Pass was a descent into a primal landscape. The official park trails, such as they were in this remote sector, vanished. I found myself following ancient game trails, paths worn into the earth by millennia of unseen hooves and paws, leading towards that jagged wound in the mountains. The air grew colder, heavier. My GPS unit, predictably, went dead. The silence was broken only by the crunch of my boots on the scree and the pounding of my own heart. The rocks here were indeed like bone, weathered and ancient, some bearing strange, almost organic-looking striations. As I neared the entrance to the defile, the sense of being watched intensified. It wasn't the fleeting peripheral shadows I'd grown accustomed to. This was a focused, malevolent scrutiny. The wind, when it gusted through the narrow opening, carried a faint charnel scent, and something else, a whisper of names. Gieg, Nahani. Rule 6 screamed in my mind, but it was too late. The names were already in the air, in my head. The entrance to the Bone Pass was darker than any natural shadow. It felt less like a geological formation and more like a maw. As I stepped across the threshold, the temperature plummeted. The faint light from the overcast sky seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness within. The walls of the pass rose sheer on either side, composed of that same bone, like rock, but here it seemed to pulse with a faint, internal luminescence, revealing intricate, unsettling patterns that were not entirely natural, almost like a vast, fossilized script. I pushed deeper, the silence absolute, save for a faint, rhythmic dripping from somewhere above and a soft, almost inaudible scraping sound that seemed to come from the rock walls themselves. The air was thick, difficult to breathe, and carried that same faint, charnel undertone, now mixed with the metallic tang of something akin to old blood. And the sharp, sterile scent of deep, ancient ice. Then I saw it. Not a structure, not an artifact, but a change in the very fabric of the pass. The narrow defile opened slightly into a small, circular chamber, and in its center, the rock floor was not rock at all. It was a dark obsidian-like surface, smooth and reflective, despite the oppressive gloom. And on its surface, faintly glowing, was the spiral Blackwood had sketched. It pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. As I stared, mesmerized, a sound emerged from the spiral, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the stone beneath my feet and up into my chest. It was the sound of the earth itself, ancient and powerful. And from the depths of that hum, a voice, or something that mimicked a voice, spoke directly into my mind. It wasn't in English or any human language, but I understood it with a chilling, primal clarity. It spoke of hunger, of waiting, of cycles, and of names. It knew my name, Elias Vance. The locket in my pocket grew cold, so cold it burned against my skin. I pulled it out. It was vibrating in sympathy with the hum from the spiral. The last of Blackwood's scrawled words flashed in my mind. It knows my name now. The pass is open. The darkness in the chamber deepened, and from the edges of my vision, shapes began to coalesce, tall, gaunt figures, their forms indistinct, their eyes burning with the same cold, internal light as the rocks. They were the Watchers, the Guardians, or perhaps the extensions of the pass itself. They moved with an unnatural silence, their presence an overwhelming wave of ancient cold and alien intellect. I knew, with a certainty that transcended fear, that there was no retreat. The rules had been a fragile shield, now shattered. The wilderness of Denali, in its most secret heart, was not indifferent, it was aware. It was ancient, and it was hungry. The Athabascan legends spoke of Denali as the Great One, a place of immense power, a spiritual nexus. They spoke of spirits of the land, of mountains, of places that demanded respect. I had trespassed, ignored the warnings. And now the pass, the door Blackwood had written of, was indeed open, and it was calling me in. I am a ranger at Denali National Park, and I am walking into the heart of the mountain. Whether I will ever walk out is a story only Denali can tell.